Now, although the U.S. shared the 20th position in ranking with 25 other countries, its position is obviously not in keeping with the resources used for the task of teaching and learning.
We're going to do some poems to start the evening. This is our Chicago set. So to open the Chicago set, I've written this poem in dedication to the Picasso sculpture. This is called Chicago Public Sculpture, number 2, the Picasso. There's a number 1 in here about the bean that I won't be reading. Aardvark flattened by circumstance. You didn't ask to be perfect. Like everything that we love, there's something unmistakably fucked up about you and your face. There is an infamous omelet that can only be prepared by cooking eggs on your steel, heated by the sun through our smog and resentment, legitimate grit stuck in it. This is called the Chicago omelet, and it is hard to swallow. Stringed bagpipe of impossible, I blow my cheeks blue into you. There are gifts under your bows. There's applause at the end of your bows, and when the apocalypse hits, you'll be all that's left standing of a city full of opinions and lungs. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, you can clap for me. That's fine. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I make my family clap for me whenever I enter a room, too. So I'll be back in a second. My name is Robbie Q. Telfer. I'm the Director of Performances at Young Chicago Authors. And speaking of Young Chicago Authors, coming up next is a Young Chicago author. Her name is Kush Thompson. She's a senior at Wells Academy. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Kush.
Thank you. Hello. So I'm Kush. I'm going to do my Chicago poem too. Chicago is a black woman that forgot her roots. She's too much prairie to be anything pretty, pressed perm into kinky pasture, chemical burn runs Mississippi deep, sore in her scalp, but sun breaks through her mouth and in her smile. There's always morning. She never sleeps. Stirs from disturbances in her dreams, iron horses galloping down her ribs, those metal bones creak to an exhausted stop atop the knots of an industrialized spine. Crawl like ants into the hills of her kneecaps. Wet whispers drip down the nape of her neck, her headdress adorned with beads of sweat. Europe done crept into her jaw again. She don't talk much. The wind howls in Algonquin. Thickened with smoke, she smells like burnt skin, sounds like a city scorching to its knees, sirens wailing, someone's always running, frantic feet pounding against a concrete womb, a constant kicking in her stomach but never giving birth. No one makes it out alive or whole. Chicago is a battered wife baptizing her baby's skulls beneath a great lake, cleansing more of her sins than theirs. La Llorona is in the Midwest now. Canals gashed into her wrist, her veins hew the murky blues of Michigan water. Namesake rivers. Pigeons perched on her collarbones peck at the withered sheet of skin stretched taut, wanting to see if she bleeds like we do. Soothed wrinkles in a crumpled napkin, her hands calloused, quiet captors. She never asked to be spread that way. Shovels pierced into her hymen, broke barriers, built more of them. Transverse incisions tear her torso into separate territories. Separate towns can be located on the same street. Segregation is a thin line between Levitt and Western. But sometimes. She can almost feel the birch bark canoes curve along her riverbend, taste the red oak acorn on the back of her throat. Here, Chicago, she never sleeps, but looks like she's been beauty resting. She got pothole dimples that sink tires. Ankles of men that stepped too close. She loves like her lungs are soft and giving out. A constant kicking in her stomach is all the pounding her heart wishes it could make. She loves like the green line racing from Cottage Grove beside sunrise and violet orange clouds. Like a subway emerging from a black tunnel into daylight, sore in her scalp, but sun breaks through her mouth and in her smile. There's always morning. Thank you.
That's Kush Thompson. Remember that name? Because she's going to be famous. It's always intimidating to speak after Kush because she's a much better poet than I am. Kush is a member of the Young Chicago Authors Program, and she is going to be competing starting Saturday at Louder Than a Bomb, which is a program of Young Chicago Authors. Louder Than a Bomb is the world's largest teen poetry festival. It started in 2000 as a response to a proposed city ordinance that wanted to outlaw high school kids gathering in groups in public. And we decided that we wanted to put on this festival that had lots of kids gathering in public doing positive things and not violent things. Because if you believe in young people, I know all you know, they will surprise you. They will exceed expectations. So since it started, it has grown into a festival that is 3 weeks long. We accommodate 75 two-hour events over the course of the 3 weeks, and over 90 teams of students from different high schools around Chicago and community organizations. It's a really great thing, and now it's actually spreading because of a documentary that was made about it in 2008. Louder Than a Bomb is now happening in Tulsa, in Michigan, in D.C., Baltimore, in Omaha, and in Boston, with other cities on the radar to start their own citywide poetry festival. And that's the appeal of it, is that we found in the work at Young Chicago Authors that we have to teach young people their artist voice, which means you have to be as honest with yourself as possible. And as you know, if you're trying to be honest with yourself as possible about what your artist voice sounds like, you end up inevitably finding your own voice, what your identity sounds like. And that's the value of the work that we do, is we help young people find out who they are. And it's the only citywide celebration for young people that I've experienced that allows them to really feel like they own it themselves. And we get people from every single side of the city, and they all come together in this beautiful mass of humanity. So if you're interested in seeing the festival coming up, it's happening at Columbia College, at the Chicago Cultural Center, at Steppenwolf, Victory Gardens, at the Vic, all over the place. YoungChicagoAuthors.org. I'm going to read my poem about Chicago and segregation now. Like I said, Kush is way better than me. So this poem is called Mental Graffiti, another Chicago poem, and it's dedicated to you. Chicago, when will you be angelic? When will you realize that the graffiti is a gift? Perhaps when we realize that the hyper-segregation you gave us is a gift too, a shitty one. You will never be resolved. Daily, you're defined and defiled and defied, sanctified. You're revised and reviled and revived, vandalized. You're revered and despised and derived, redesigned. You're reworked and reworn and reward. Second prize. You always say that I'm fired before I say I've resigned. It's a sin when you shine, ecstasy when you die through the din. You're a joke that is dirty and divine. I miss you when I'm gone, but ne'er do I pine, because nobody pines anymore. It's not your style with all your scented floor cleaners, car air fresheners, fake Christmas trees. These are the only pines in your design, naturally unnatural, communal in your hermitude. Words made for you hold you up just as much as concrete and steel do, like a 3D dictionary in HD. This is very clever because HD means high definition, and dictionaries have a lot of definitions in them. I should have a footnote here. It's very smart. a mutually secret promise shared from us in the lispy, spitting shush of color. Shh. We give you this gift. Shh. We give you these words. Shh. And I won't pitch a fit because you've been painting over our gifts if you don't fetch the whip, because I've been on the South Side recently and I actually talked to a black person. I'll see you in hell. Shh, Chicago. Thank you very much.
Wow, let's give... Hello, there we are. Let's give it up for Robbie and Kush. That was Kush Thompson, who is a senior at Wells High School and just an amazingly engaging performer and writer. And that was, of course, Robbie Telfer, who you heard a little bit about Young Chicago Authors and Louder Than a Bomb. Robbie is also the co-founder of the Encyclopedia Show. You may have heard of it, which is now being staged in 10 cities across the world. Did you like that? Is that okay? All right. He is also the head organizer of Louder Than a Bomb, of course, which is, again, the largest team-based slam poetry slam in the world. So very cool. Active teaching artist and lecturer in Chicago as well. So let's give them another robust round of applause for coming out tonight. Thank you, guys. And they hate to ding-dong ditch us here, but they do have another event to go to tonight. So. Awesome. We love it. Hello. How are you guys? Good evening. How are we doing? Where's our 6 o'clock energy, people? My name is Nicole Lasordo. I'll be your cruise director for the evening tonight. I am the Senior Director of Education at the Auditorium Theater, and I've also had the pleasure of being one of the faculty members on the first cohort of the TAD Studio, which just finished on Monday night. And we're smack dab in the middle of the second cohort just beginning, which I think just is in its second week this week of the advanced cohort. So a lot of wonderful, what is the TAD Studio? The TAD Studio is a wonderful teaching, professional, discourse, active, hands-on, participatory, exciting discussion of teaching artist practice, and really providing something that's never really, I think, happened certainly before in the country. That's a really hands-on kind of discussion about what's happening in the field and just how to be prepared to really go in and teach kids in different settings and do that effectively and be able to really talk about that effectively. So it's really, really wonderful. We really love what we're doing there. So look at us. Turn around, say hello to somebody. Have you met anybody? Say hello. I told you I'm the cruise director tonight. Say hello. I promise there won't be any shuffleboard. Okay, have we all met? Have we all said hello? Excellent. I hope you made a new friend tonight. Because this is what it's all about. It's actually, I think, all about meeting new people and having discussions in the same room together. I think in the last 4 years in Chicago, I think a lot has been happening here. A lot of really exciting wheels have been turning. And I think the reason we're all sitting in the room is part of that bigger wheel turn. A lot of conversations about how we do the work that we do in arts education in the city and how do we really affect change and make sure that every kid is getting access and equity in arts education in this city. It's definitely, I think, a conversation, as you'll see from Nick's research that he presents today, that is being looked at all across this country. And, you know, we're on this pendulum swing, I think, constantly of educational reform and arts education and where we're at. So how do we, as practitioners, be ready to kind of constantly respond to where that pendulum swing is at any given moment? Because it's going to constantly keep swinging, right? So how do we prepare ourselves to react? And I think the discourse that we have around this is part of that bigger discussion. And maybe sometimes we can be part of pushing the pendulum in one of the directions. So today you'll be hearing about a lot of that national research that Nick Rabkin has been doing on the subject. And we'll be having the opportunity to talk a little bit with other teaching artists and stakeholders vested in this conversation, and having a really deep discourse around the practice and around who teaching artists are, what they're doing, where they're at, and again, how we can continue as a field to push this work forward together. So you'll see me a little bit later. We'll have a really lovely discussion and hear from a lot of really wonderful panelists tonight. And if you need anything, you know, again, I'm your cruise director, so you just let me know, and we'll have a really great time together. It's my pleasure at this point to introduce two really important people in the process of certainly the TAD Studio and all of this teaching artist development work. Our host here today, David Flatley, who is of course the Executive Director here at the Center for Community Arts Partnerships at Columbia College, and Betty Farrell, the Executive Director of the Cultural Policy Center at the University of Chicago. Please help me welcome them.
Thank you, Nicole. On behalf of Columbia College Chicago and CCAP, I'd like to welcome you here this evening. It's a very exciting evening for us. And, you know, Columbia College is a teaching artist institution, and we're well suited to be leading the charge with this work. CCAP has spent 13 years championing the role of teaching artists with Project AIM and all of the initiatives across CCAP in supporting how arts education is delivered and supported, and learning through the arts is supported in Chicago. As Nicole referenced, the last few years have been particularly interesting as the landscape has changed, and the district, working with the philanthropic community, has led a citywide civic dialogue around how we can strengthen the infrastructure of Chicago. So the Chicago Arts Learning Initiative, CALI, and the subsequent Ingenuity Incorporated, these are all developments that have been fast and furious. And the TAD Studio is a direct result of many of those dialogues and some of the thought leadership that we have been engaged in with many of our partners in thinking about this. And it's critical because there's clearly not enough resources at the district to do this alone. And so the philanthropic community has known for a long time that the arts partners have played a critical role. So we're delighted to be here, and we're also especially delighted to be welcoming Nick to present his research. He started this research here at Columbia and then continued and finished it at the University of Chicago. And at this time, I'd like to welcome my colleague, Betty Farrell, who is the Executive Director of the Cultural Policy Center at the University of Chicago, who's graciously agreed to co-sponsor and support this work with us tonight. So, Betty, here.
Hello, everybody, and I'm really pleased to be able to add my welcome to you as well. As you've heard, I'm Betty Farrell from the Cultural Policy Center at the University of Chicago. Nick Rabkin has been a senior researcher at NORC at the university, as well as a research affiliate of our center for a brief moment in time, and we hope it will continue for more. We were able to lure him down to Hyde Park and work with us, but we know we have to share, so we will see him back here. But I'm really delighted to be here and to represent both of our organizations co-sponsoring this program along with our colleagues here at Columbia College. In terms of significant and contemporary cultural policy issues, the arts and education should be, of course, and often are, at the very top of the priority list, although I think for different reasons now than in the recent past. What some of the people in my field called the old paradigm of cultural policy really focused on the funding stream particularly for nonprofit arts organizations. And from that perspective, arts education was particularly important because it was the way to cultivate an audience for the arts, particularly an audience for those nonprofit arts organizations in the future. These would be the future art patrons and audience of our time or of the future. That's the old model. The new cultural policy paradigm is much more about fostering a creative economy, looking at creating a creative workforce, the creative industries. Many, many cities around the country, including ours, are really concerned with that issue. The new cultural policy paradigm is about fostering participation that is much broader than it was in the past and engaging communities in ways that they have not done in the past, as well as developing and sustaining cultural vitality across communities. So those are some of the new watchwords of the field that I'm in. Suddenly, the cultural policy world is aware of the kind of work that you all are engaged in here and thinking about arts and education as being really important drivers of creativity, of innovation, and of cultural vitality. Nick Rabkin's work has really been on the forefront of what I think of as a tremendous sea change in cultural policy orientations and perspectives. He has very deep roots in Chicago. He's certainly well known in the Chicago art world and art community on a really impressive number of fronts, and I need a paper in front of me to tell me this list. He has been the executive director of the Organic Theater Company, and I just want to read you this really short blurb by Richard Christensen from his book, A Theater of Our Own, A History and Memoir of 1,001 Nights in Chicago, who said, that the Organic Theater Company was the quintessential Chicago theater group, venturesome, innovative, energetic, improvisational, always on the edge of disaster or triumph. It was a small but powerful and influential force in fostering the talent and shaping the personality of the theater, of the city's theater scene. In addition to his work in theater, Nick was Deputy Commissioner of Cultural Affairs at the DCA under Mayors Washington and Daley. He has been the Senior Arts Program Officer at the MacArthur Foundation. He was the Director of Columbia College's Center for Arts Policy. He's been, and this is a title I think is particularly lovely to tell all of you. He is a senior research scientist at NORC, and he is currently a member of the team conducting the 2012 Chicago Cultural Plan. So if he was able to split in two directions, he'd be at the community meeting, the first of the community meetings that's being held tonight right here at Columbia. He's a blogger and a writer and a commentator. And on the national scene, he has been the lead author of two really important recent reports that are getting a lot of well-deserved attention. One of them is the NEA publication called Arts Education in America, What the Declines Mean for Arts Participation. And the other is Teaching Artists in the Future of Education, which we're going to be hearing a lot more of tonight. I would just add that from my perspective of the academic cultural policy field, to have produced two such studies of national prominence and getting the kind of well-deserved attention that they're getting, this sort of qualifies for rock star status in our world. So it is my pleasure to introduce Nick Rabkin.
There's like no way that I could live up to that. Jesus. Well, actually, you know, what it makes me sound like is completely schizophrenic, which is kind of true. You know, there's this sort of organic theater Columbia side, which is sort of wild and crazy, and then there's the University of Chicago side, which is not, right? I mean, there are a couple of folks here from the University of Chicago, and I whispered to one of them just a moment ago, this does not feel like an event at the University of Chicago, does it? You don't usually get, you know, a teaching artist and a poet to stand up and start an event at the University of Chicago. So I appreciate things like this happening at places like this, where we do hear poets and students to start a serious conversation. So thank you to both Columbia College and CCAP and to the Cultural Policy Center at the University of Chicago for helping to pull this thing together. I really appreciate the opportunity to kind of, for the first time in public, speak about this research that I've worked on the past few years to a Chicago audience. I really, I'm happy to be here, and I hope you all will be too. There are, yes, there we go. There are two headlines in arts education today. After, can you see that? Oh, the lights are going down a little bit. You can see it okay? You see there's a line that goes up and then a line that goes down? That's all you need to see, right, really, for our purposes right now. There are two headlines in arts education today. First, after a century of steady growth, there's been a significant decline, that's the line that goes down, in the proportion of American children who have taken classes or lessons in the arts. In 1930, which is the beginning on the left-hand side there of the graph, in 1930, less than a quarter of 18-year-olds had taken any arts classes or lessons as kids. By 1982, nearly two-thirds had. A third still hadn't taken any, but two-thirds had. But by 2008, the rate had dropped back under 50% again. Arts education among white children is down just slightly. That's the line at the top of the graph there. But down sharply among African American and Latino students. I was particularly taken with a line in Cush's poem, segregation is a thin line between Levitt and Western. Theater and dance education are not down at all. Just music and visual art, which are the two subjects most taught in schools, leading to the inescapable conclusion that the decline is mostly in schools in urban districts that serve low-income minority students. There is an arts desert in many schools that they attend, too many. Second headline, over the same 3 decades of decline, substantial numbers of teaching artists have moved beyond the community venues where they have long taught and into schools. They've mitigated, but they haven't reversed the decline. The best programs have had remarkable successes, often in the arts deserts, and some of the successes have been documented by a growing body of research. Not only do TAs teach in these programs, but they often design and manage them as well. Their success suggests that a successful strategy to reverse the decline in arts education and distribute it equitably must include teaching artists. Chicago has a special place in the history of teaching artists. Jane Addams hired the first TAs in 1889 to run the arts programs at Chicago's Hull House, the country's first settlement house. By 1914, there were 400 settlement houses across the country. Most had substantial arts programs, just as Hull House did, and they had great influence during the Progressive era. Benny Goodman took his first clarinet lessons at Hull House. Louis Armstrong took his first cornet lessons at the Home for Colored Waifs in New Orleans. Those great artists notwithstanding, developing professional talent was not the mission of the arts at the settlements. The idea at the settlements was that the arts were for everyone. They were tools for weaving the webs of social connection that build strong communities. They were for cultivating the confidence, agency, and voice required to participate in a democracy where everyone has the right to express themselves and contribute to the culture. They were for people's connections to their ancestry and for imagining better and more hopeful worlds in the future. Those principles and objectives demanded a different kind of arts pedagogy that broke in important ways from the conservatory instructional traditions of patronage, professionalism, and cultural hierarchy. The settlements were serious about aesthetics, but they were also about critical exploration of the world, celebrating tradition, weaving the arts into daily life, cultivating imagination, and appreciating all the world's cultures. I was particularly attracted to this picture. I wanted so much to have a picture that accompanied it. I couldn't find it. These are kids in a drawing class at Hull House, undated photograph. There's a great photograph, probably about the same time, of students in a drawing class at the Art Institute. And the two photographs sort of sum up what's different about the arts at the settlements and the arts at the conservatory. You can probably imagine the other photograph, right? TAs developed the principles that began at the settlements through their work in many community institutions that have followed them. But TAs were slow to enter the schools. That began changing in the 1960s when poets began to go to schools to teach children to write poetry, not just to read and appreciate it, but to write poetry. And by the mid-70s, arts organizations were sending artists to schools to help students learn to make art, moving beyond exposure toward something more serious, engaging to students, and meaningful to schools. As TAs began applying the spirit of the settlement's spirit of social purpose in schools, they developed a keener understanding of the ways that the arts affect learning, and they started applying the arts to the challenges of improving schools. By the 1990s, research was showing that arts education had powerful effects, and that those effects appeared to be more powerful for low-income students. This, seems to me, raises a very perplexing and deep mystery about American education. If the problem is that too many low-income students are academically behind the curve, and there's solid evidence that arts learning leverages their achievement, why has arts education been systematically declining in schools, and particularly in low-income schools over the last 30 years? Well, I call it the three horsemen of the arts ed apocalypse. It's just one horse shy of the whole whatever, Megillah. There are three big reasons. In other words, there are three big reasons why the arts have been declining. First, school reform. A Nation at Risk, pictured here, the report that launched the school reform movement in 1983 when Reagan was president, remember that name, argued that our schools had lost their focus and they'd lowered their standards. It found, quote, a rising tide of mediocrity. That's the most famous quote from the report. A rising tide of mediocrity in schools that substituted appetizers and desserts for entrees in the curriculum. It implied that the arts were just a dessert, inessential to quality education. And that report has been a template for school reform that has unfolded ever since. But why did A Nation at Risk dismiss the arts? Well, there's a basic misconception, very fundamental and very deeply held by most Americans, that the arts are emotional and expressive, but not cognitive and academic. This belief is grounded in a classical concept of the mind, that conscious and rational, logical thought is of a fundamentally different and higher order than feelings, emotions, and sensations. But modern cognitive and neuroscience has shown that this model of the mind is basically wrong. Thinking, feeling, and our senses are all functions of one integrated nervous system, and they are all fully embodied. There's good science that shows that people can't think in the absence of emotion and feeling, and that most thought is actually unconscious. This emergent model of the mind suggests that art, which lives in the interconnections between thought, feeling, and sensation, and links the unconscious to conscious awareness, is profoundly cognitive. Nonetheless, our ideas about learning and the ways schools are structured are rooted in the old model. It's what that old model is what neuroscientist Antonio Damasio has called Descartes' error, hence our friend Descartes. Reason 2, fiscal crisis. By the late 1970s, the transformation of the American economy that has proven so destructive to our national prosperity. We've all been living through it and struggling through it for these past years. The steep decline of manufacturing, the export of jobs from the US, and the growth of the service economy was already damaging the financial stability of school systems around the country. New York had a fiscal meltdown in 1975, and President Ford refused to bail out New York and provide aid, resulting in this legendary headline from the New York Daily News. Arts education was one of the first that received deep cuts in New York schools. Chicago laid off every art and music teacher in its elementary schools in 1978, and it still hasn't restored all those jobs. Some, yes, but not all. The pattern hopscotched cities and states across the country for a decade or more. Reason 3, tax rebellion. The Reagan Revolution was based in large measure on a deep resentment of government, often fueled by a misguided belief that the only beneficiaries of government programs were corrupt politicians and the undeserving poor, usually folks with darker complexions, and that taxes and spending on social programs like education needed to be deeply cut. The tax rebellion is now a sustained principle of American politics. Public education has been one of its most prominent targets, and the arts are among the most dispensable of education programs, and teachers have been vilified in the process. Despite formal designation as a core subject, even democratic administrations that speak to the value of creativity, that are beginning to discover the new paradigm that Betty mentioned in cultural policy, even democratic administrations that speak to the value of creativity in education, have been ineffective advocates for it. I wanted to ask and answer quickly, has school reform worked? Because if it had, there might not be a reason to build a case for arts education. But if school reform were meeting its objectives, which were closing the achievement gap, improving US students' standings on international tests, raising standards, and preparing all students for higher education and work in the 21st century, the case for arts education could be quickly closed and put aside. But a new report from University of Chicago's Consortium on Chicago School Research showed that more than 2 decades of determined efforts to reform Chicago's schools has had very limited results. It showed that many reported test score improvements were actually the result, the effect of easier tests, not higher student achievement, and that the racial achievement gap had actually widened over those 20 years across the district. Similar findings deflated test scores in New York, and scores were inflated in Philadelphia, Washington, and Atlanta by systematic cheating by school administrators. Analysis of international tests shows that the US has fallen farther behind in more subjects over these years. School reform is not succeeding on its own terms. Lately, even some of the architects of school reform have concluded that its prevailing strategies have, quote, outlived its usefulness. Unfortunately, school reform has reformed arts education out of many classrooms and schools without improving the prospects of many students. Yet, sometimes, in the poorest of schools, TAs are demonstrating that arts education is profoundly cognitive, deeply motivating, promotes emotional and social development, opens pathways into other subjects and back into school for alienated students, and heightens achievement. They've shown that the arts can amplify learning across the curriculum and cultivate the kind of teamwork and commitment to excellence that is absent in too many schools. They've shown that conventional assumptions about arts education's limits are wrong. Recognizing the failures of school reform may open the door to ideas about improving schools that include the arts. This could be a moment of opportunity for us. So far, I haven't actually told you very much about teaching artists, so now is the chapter on teaching artists. fasten your seatbelts. We're going to move through a lot of data fast. Don't even bother to take notes. We surveyed 3,500 teaching artists and program managers in a dozen study sites across the country, and we interviewed in depth 220 artists, program managers, teachers, principals, funders, and district administrators in our dozen sites. So we're going to take a quick tour of what we learned about TAs and then consider how they fit into both education and the arts. They're well educated. Two-thirds have degrees in an art form and half have master's degrees. Here's one of our most surprising findings. Their average age is 45. And the average teaching artist has 12 years of experience teaching. Do the math. That means most teaching artists enter the field in their early to mid-30s. They are mature, well-educated, and they have considerable experience. What do? Teaching artists are mostly responsible for gateway experiences into the arts. They teach basic skills, especially in schools. They do teach more advanced skills in non-school programs. But even in those gateway experiences, TAs often speak of teaching the processes of the arts, about how to think and work like an artist. How do they learn to do this? Well, you're looking like I'm one slide behind. Okay. Yes. Now I've caught up to myself. Thank you. Keep me on my toes, will you? How do they learn to do this? Most of the training that they get is actually informal. Their arts training is very important to them. That's how they get their artistic chops or start to get their artistic chops. But TAs mainly learn to teach by teaching. They do not rate the value of training by their employers generally very highly. They find that it is mostly about the logistics of the programs for which they work, not about teaching and learning. And that very little of the training that is available to teaching artists is for people who are veterans. It's mostly for people who are just entering the field. One of the great things about TAD Studio is, as Nicole said, there are two cohorts. One was for beginners, and the one that just started a couple of weeks ago is for veteran TAs. More than half of TAs work for nonprofit organizations, usually, but not always, at their employer's venue. Half are sent to other venues, though, at least part of the time. And half of all teaching artists teach in schools part of the time. They also teach in social service agencies, youth organizations, prisons, parks, you name it. YCA, Young Chicago Authors, which you saw just a moment ago, is a beautiful example of an organization basically that works outside of schools. But I'll bet that some of the YCA, in fact, I know for a fact, some YCA teaching artists also work in schools. Most who work in schools do teach during school hours, but more than half also teach in after-school programs. Very few teaching artists are employees. Most work on contracts. Just a quarter teach full-time. The average TA had 3 employers during the last year. Average hourly rate is $40 an hour. Not a bad rate if you teach enough hours. But unfortunately, part-time TAs don't work many hours. In fact, the average is that they work about 5 hours a week, and they earn very little, just $9,800 a year from teaching. Full-time TAs earn about $39,000 a year, more or less the average for artists in the United States. Part-time TAs also do other work, of course. 3/4 earn money from their art. A quarter work in arts administration. 3/8 do work in other fields. Anybody wait tables here? More than 1 in 5 does not have health insurance. More than a third higher than the national rate. And I think if you compared people with master's and bachelor's degrees, as almost all teaching artists have, the rate of uninsured people with college degrees is much, much lower than this. This is higher than the national rate. It includes, you know, all Americans who didn't graduate from high school. The conditions in which TAs work, obviously, can be extremely discouraging. And we talked to plenty who were angry, some even despondent about their status. But despite the low pay, insecurity, and lack of insurance, TAs also, by and large, appreciate the chance to make money in a field that they love. They're loyal to their employers, even those that they get pissed off at. Would take more work if it were available. Believe teaching makes them better artists. And they see teaching as a strategy for community and social change. Their roots in the settlement movement are very clear and very deep. They are mission-driven people. You know, it seems reasonable to assume that good teaching has a role when education programs are associated with student success. The practice of teachers in classrooms is what matters most when it comes to students learning in school. The principal strategies of school reform, higher standards, school and teacher accountability, intensified testing, and choice, may affect teaching practice indirectly. But the record of school reform, which we've discussed, especially in schools serving low-income kids, suggests that those strategies are not of great consequence and may even be counterproductive. Our working hypothesis was that TAs, particularly those having wider effects on student achievement, are bringing effective perspectives, practices, and strategies to their teaching. So we examined research on what good teaching looks like. And then we interviewed teaching artists and asked them, how do you teach? And we tried to look and see how they matched up. Could teaching artists be vehicles both for sustaining arts education in schools and for introducing innovative and effective instructional strategies? There's broad agreement among leading researchers and education organizations about good teaching. Reports and studies have repeatedly found 3 principles at its heart. I'm off again? You guys are not keeping me current here. You know, you have to be on your toes too. There's broad agreement about what good teaching looks like, and there are 3 principles that, there we go. There are 3 principles. There are 3 principles that, that there's broad agreement are present in good teaching. The first is that good teaching is student-centered. It begins with students' own interests and what they already know. It offers students real challenges, choices, and responsibilities, and features curriculum that they find relevant. 2, good teaching is cognitive. Learning is the consequence of thinking and work on compelling ideas and problems across subject areas, and the demonstration of real understanding through the representation of learning in a range of media, including the art forms. And 3rd, good teaching is social. Individual students build competencies and knowledge, but students do that better together than they do it alone. Good teaching involves building a community of learners in the classroom that works and thinks together, that challenges each other, reflects on its work, and supports taking the risks necessary to learn new things. Now, I don't want to give you the impression that every teaching artist in every program is equally committed to these principles. The conservatory tradition is still very much alive and very influential, and is not entirely or always consistent with these principles. It is a different model for teaching, and it works for many people. But what we heard from TAs across the country is that these 3 qualities are widely and highly prized. They are woven into TA's identities as artists and the mental and physical processes integral to making art. So I want to show you or talk to you a little bit about how they explain them to us when we talk to them. A slow process of disengagement starts, according to the research, by the time kids are in 3rd grade, sometimes earlier for students. TAs must win students' commitment early and quickly to accomplish anything significant in the brief hours that they have to spend together. Engagement is job 1 for teaching artists, and the starting point is often using students' own experiences and interests. TAs then sustain engagement by creating a safe space where students can take risks and have considerable freedom to make aesthetic choices. Voice. You heard Robbie talk about voice just a few minutes ago. I did not prompt him. That was completely spontaneous. Voice is a metaphor, we heard it across the country, about building a coherent perspective on the world and life, a focused set of concerns that stimulate curiosity and creativity, and an aesthetic signature. Artists spend their lives developing their voices, and students come to school with experience, perspectives, ideas, and questions. Activating those is the surest pathway to engaging students. TAs look for ways to connect curriculum to the world outside the classroom and to students' own lives. A focus on voice is the essence of what student-focused means. A prevailing theory of academic failure is that it flows from a lack of discipline. So schools often make discipline of the highest order of priority. Priority 1 in many schools is actually teaching students to observe the school rules. The freedom and flexibility that's embedded in voice are not a comfortable fit with that kind of idea of discipline. And it's not that TAs don't care about order. They're keenly aware that good learning environments are orderly and well managed. But many told us that good classroom management is mostly a function of engaging students in challenging work in which they develop their voices. The energy and buzz of meaningful learning can be threatening in a school that defines itself by its rules. But student self-regulation is a far more effective strategy for classroom management than yelling and threats, which is, of course, what we see in far too many schools. Meaning is at the center of TA's work. It signifies 2 things. What something means, of course, to all of us: a word, a gesture, a fact, thought, a color, a sound, and kids need to learn those meanings of things. But it's also something personal and subjective. What makes something meaningful? Making meaning and making something meaningful, both, are what making art is about. And TAs consistently try to give students opportunities to do both. Subjects organize knowledge. They are not how we learn. They're how we organize what we've learned. Good curriculum poses compelling questions about big themes and looks at them through multiple lenses. All learning involves the movement of the mind from lens to lens, domain to domain, from what we already know to what we don't understand. Arts integration links arts methods, ideas, and content with methods, ideas, and content in other subjects around compelling problems through an artistic medium. It helps make a fragmented curriculum whole for students. Now, some TAs are skeptics, and I'm sure some of you are too. They fear arts integration trivializes art, makes it a handmaiden to other subjects, and done poorly, I would agree that it is trivial. But it also can be extraordinary. Perhaps, I would argue, the most significant single innovation that TAs have brought to schools. Some TAs refer to the struggle to find an elegant fit. That's a term that I think has been particularly a Chicago term for this work, between the processes of art making and learning in other subjects, which suggests an aesthetics of instruction. Good arts integration has aesthetic integrity. For example, What do Monet's wheat stacks paintings have to do with math? They're a data set. Monet painted light and color over time. An observation of the paintings reveals patterns that enable predictions. That's what math does too, folks. The connections between the two subjects are real and they're exciting. And in an 8th grade classroom in an Englewood middle school, careful looking at Monet's haystacks led students to high school algebra. Artists reflect on their work. They measure their progress against their vision, imagine how well it will work for others. They learn from their mistakes. They revise and make judgments in the absence of formulas. These are the assessment practices of artistic production, and they are essential learning tools. This is the kind of assessment that is in short supply in schools, of course, where mistakes are discouraged and standardized tests are the ultimate assessment. This kind of assessment is central to artistic production and practice, formative, qualitative, authentic, and ongoing, and it's badly needed in schools. Play and games are essential and fundamental to learning. In this crowd, I expect 90% of you to know who Viola Spolin is. Raise your hand if you know who Viola is. Ooh, okay, then I'll have to tell you, because half of you don't. Viola Spolin, how many of you are in the theater here? Well, how many of you in theater don't know who Viola Spolin is? A couple. Okay. Viola Spolin, ooh, I've just shamed somebody out of the room, huh? Viola Spolin was a social worker at Hull House in the 30s, and the trend in social work at the time was something that they called group work. And often the group work was games. Viola was also an amateur theater person. She did community theater. And she studied children's imaginative play at Hull House. What she realized was that the roots of theater are in the imaginative play and games that children were doing at Hull House. And that the impulse to make theater is in everybody. And it starts with imaginative play in childhood. And Viola sort of distilled what she learned by watching kids' imaginative play into a set of theater games. Now, there are probably a few more people who are clicking on who Viola Spolin is. She ended up writing books about theater games. Her son, Paul Sills, started the first off-loop theater company in Hyde Park in the early 50s, the Compass Players. And then when Compass Players went out of business, moved to the north side and started the Second City, which used Viola's theater games as the basis for all their work. Meanwhile, though, of course, Viola moved from Hull House to the WPA. You all know what the WPA was? Okay, good. Viola moved to the WPA and ran the WPA recreation program in Chicago, starting community theaters in field houses in the parks all over Chicago. A different model, a different paradigm for cultural policy, I should say. Cultural participation at that level. There's no reason why we couldn't have community theater groups in every park field house again in Chicago, really. And there are teaching artists who are ready to do it, right? I hear some mm-hms. Yes. So play and games are essential. Viola, if you're in theater in Chicago, you're 1 or 2 degrees of separation from Viola. She's been gone for probably 20 years now, but and even Paul's gone now too. Here's what she said about games. Games worth playing are highly social. They have a problem that needs solving within them. Each individual must become involved with others while attempting to reach a goal. Games are student-centered, they are cognitive, and they are social. Spolin could have been quoting from the literature on good teaching, but it hadn't been written yet. Making art is at the center of what TAs do with their students. In itself, that is a powerful learning experience, a pathway to learning that also documents what students have learned. After 3 years of intensive exploration of TAs and the world in which they work, we came to 4 major conclusions. Probably going to move too fast through this to take notes too, so just listen. First, of course, you already know this. After 3 decades of decline and in the midst of major financial challenges, this may be a turning point for arts education. It will continue to wither and erode in schools if policymakers don't rethink the strategies that dominate school reform. But if they do, arts education could become a focus of bold new efforts to engage students, deepen learning, and enliven school cultures. Education Secretary Arnie April. Cute! That's an in-joke. Not everybody gets it, but most of you do. Education Secretary Arnie Duncan, another Chicagoan, recently wrote, education in the arts is more important than ever. In the global economy, creativity is essential. The best way to foster that creativity is through arts education. That's a good sign. But I'd like to see some fire and not just smoke from the secretary. The pendulum that swung away from the arts during these last 3 decades of school reform will swing back, though, if values like creativity and innovation are more broadly embraced as essential purposes of education. Second, TA's teaching strategies are aligned with what experts agree are the principles of good teaching and learning. Build demand for arts education. Creative advocacy for arts education should be based on rigorous research, and it should tell powerful stories about student learning and development, particularly about the arts and students who have real difficulty in schools. Stories matter. We know that. Stories really matter. And TAs are a fine source of the best of them. Policy won't change without constant and organized pressure. 2, make the field sustainable. There's a danger that many TAs will become so discouraged that they will abandon the field. Advocates for arts education should also advocate for better conditions for TAs. Systematic improvements are going to be tough now, there's no question, but even symbolic validation will help. A shout out to 3 Arts, which gives awards for the first time to teaching artists in Chicago. And healthcare reform will matter a lot. Develop arts integration. Arts integration has not received the kind of systematic support that disciplinary and standards-based arts education received from the late 1980s. It should get it now. Integrated arts instruction and disciplinary arts instruction are complementary, and schools need them both. Provision. It's time to recognize that schools need both full-time arts faculty and TAs as well. Arts education won't become available to all students without the development of TAs as a basic resource. TAs and specialists already work well together in many schools. There is no built-in contradiction between TAs and art specialists, although there is a long-standing and historic conflict between them. We have got to get over that. Because as long as advocacy for arts education is divided, it will not be as effective as it needs to be. Reflective practice and formative assessment are key processes in the cycle of art making. Both are badly needed in schools where students are trained to be fearful of mistakes and multiple choice tests distort the curriculum and learning. Assessment can be the area of the next big contribution of TAs to schools. Make it a priority. Professional development. TAs are hungry for good professional development centered on the practice of teaching and learning, built on a foundation of big ideas about the arts and learning and filled with hands-on project-based experiences and vital to the development of a community of learners among TAs and teachers. In these times, the work artists do in schools and in communities is often hard and discouraging. But I encourage you to remember that if nothing else, artists are awfully resourceful people. They routinely spin gold from straw. It will take great effort and great imagination to create a better future for arts education, for teaching artists, and for students in so many schools. But artists are nothing if not imaginative and persistent. All of you who do this work know that. I hope you recognize yourself in that description. And what you've heard tonight, these are qualities you have in abundance. So use them. Thank you very much.
I'm going to invite the respondents to come up while you're making your way to the stage, and before I introduce you, just to kind of hear some things that resonated with me. The average TA has 3 employees per year. School reform has outlived its usefulness. TAs are mission-driven people. Arts were tools for weaving the webs of social connection that build strong communities. And my favorite, arts ed is just dessert. Well, I don't know about you, but I love dessert myself, and I happen to think it's part of a balanced meal. It's my pleasure to introduce this evening's respondents to Nick's presentation. I'll start closest to my right, and my right, your right as well, I suppose. We have Mario Rosero, who is the director of the Office of Arts Education at Chicago Public Schools. Next to Mario, we have Cecil McDonald Jr., who's a photographer and teaching artist at Columbia College, Chicago. Of course, we have Nick Rabkin. Next to Nick, we have Dr. Margaret Beal Spencer, the Marshall Field IV Professor of Urban Education at the University of Chicago. And last but not least, Jessica Hudson, an independent performance artist and teaching artist. Please help me welcome them to the stage. And before we get to your questions today, we're going to hear directly from the respondents.
Hi, everybody. My name's Jessica Hudson. I am a performance artist, both theater and dance, and the past 5, 6, 7 years, mostly work between, using vocabularies of both mediums. I've also been a teaching artist for about 12 years now, working with a variety of different arts organizations here in the city. And currently I am the coordinator for the TAD Studio program, and this is a part-time job that I'm doing this year as well. So I'm gonna give you a very personal response to all of this information, or some of this information that we've been hearing from Nick tonight. And I'm gonna start by saying that I'm burnt out. And I have been doing this for 12 years, and logistically at the time, it made sense as I pursued work as an actor that I could make my own schedule, and it was a great hourly rate. And at the time I was 25, and I was working as a part-time administrative assistant at a dance company for $8 an hour. And I was working as a dance studio teacher for 4-, 5-, and 6-year-olds for $15 an hour. So that was a while back. A little transparent about my age there, if you can do the math. So today as a teaching artist, I am making basically the same hourly rate. Some arts organizations and specific projects are higher rates. And honestly, it's still a great hourly rate. It gets a little less great when you think about when you subtract things like I pay my own health insurance every month, and writing that check each month. I try to sort of forget that I just wrote it. Also, things like lesson planning time is not always covered in those hours. That there often tends to be more hours than your billable hours, right? But a good arts organization will pay you for your planning meetings, and if they expect documentation work, that's part of the pay as well. That there is at least a stipend for that work that you're putting into. But there is always additional time, and anyone who is in the schools and in education and in the arts, you just know this. And the commuting, I'm traveling all over the city in doing a variety of jobs, and it's a lot of commute time. But this is freelance work, and like my art making, and so it comes with these parameters that I really never expected to get health insurance from this, that it is a freelance job, right? So I've never really questioned that. It's something that I think as a child even I learned that if you want health insurance, you get a full-time job, right? And that's what you do. So I didn't have it for a while, and then I've been paying for it for the past 8 years. And all this said, and I am burnt out. All this said, though, I have been really, really lucky in this work. I came into this field when it was growing here, and I fell into some really amazing arts organizations and schools and teacher collaborations, and I get to work with some teachers who I still work with, who I've been working with for like 12 years. And it's just such an amazing opportunity that I have this like home-based school that every spring I go back to the same school and work with the same teacher. And that feeds me. So I love this work, and I'm burned out, both at the same time. The work is rewarding in ways that my art making is rewarding, creating something, collaborating, giving to and taking from an audience. And the students, even in the residencies that totally flop, there was always that one student or that one moment, that 8th grader that the teacher warned you about who was a jerk every day that you were there. And then one day you turn around and he's feverishly writing on the computer. He's writing this dialogue that you assigned with his best friend who was equally jerky. And he wants you to hear what he wrote. And he wants to perform it for you. And he keeps hitting at his chest after he performed it and saying, I feel it, something in here. And it's just what I just wrote on that computer. And then he hits his chest again and says, I feel it in here. And it's amazing that, this is the work I get to do too, right? So, excuse me. That said, this is a picture from a project that I worked on with CAPE at a school, Williams Elementary, and it is, I am personally obsessed with the invention of flight and with early aviators and with these people who stood on the ground and looked up and just said, I want to be up there. I want to know what it looks like from up there. So I had the opportunity to take that into a school and give that away to 4th and 5th graders. And this is one of my favorite pictures. And I feel like it captures a lot about arts integration, about layering on top of the students and their work on their own perspective and their own bodies. Sorry, I know I'm going over, so I'll go very quickly. The second picture that I just wanted to show you is it was just taken 2 nights ago, Monday night at the TAD studio. Cohort 1, we graduated all these awesome people. So I feel like part of the thing I need to speak about is not just for myself tonight, but for these 25 people and all of these new teaching artists coming into the workforce. And these people have grown so much, and I'm so proud of them over the past couple of months that we've been working. And they want to do the work, and they want to do the work to pay their bills, and they want to do the work to be out there in the schools and making the difference and using the arts and thinking about arts as creativity and discipline both together, right? So I just want to honor all these people, these 25 people from Cohort 1, some of whom are here tonight, so you should find them if you're looking for teaching artists. Okay, thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cecil McDonald, Jr. I'm also an adjunct professor here at Columbia College in the photography department. Nick really laid out everything for me, and I feel like it may be a little bit redundant to say the same things, but it was also unnerving reading your report thinking that's me. Yeah. And I know you interviewed so many people, but I kept thinking he's talking about me, and I thought that was really well done, and congratulations on that body of work. I thought I would just divide this up into 3 kind of concise things. Why I do this work. I'm interested in interaction with children of color. At first it was children of color, now it's children in general. The teachers and administrators who are responsible for their education, which is a very different dynamic when you go from school to school, as many schools that I'm in, and seeing how education is played out in different schools. These issues are of special interest, especially as an artist of color who spent 4 years at Percy Julian High School, and so I consider myself a CPS product, and I always feel like, oh wow, I'm back home here. You know, I'm back in a public school. I'm also here as I'm also a teaching artist as a mentorship. As an artist of color, I think artists should be at the forefront when dealing with children, both to transform and reform the classroom experience and to expand ideas and expectations regarding art practice, right? Because it is still about art practice for me first and foremost. This work is instrumental in the development of critical thinking as it relates to how students navigate the classroom, the school, the neighborhoods, and the larger society. And I get that for them and as well for myself. I always feel like I'm in it, we're both in it together. It's never me leading or them leading. We're intertwined through the whole process. So I think about that. It's the classroom, it's the school, it's the neighborhood, and then it's the larger society. This is a piece that we did at a school called Herzl with a partner of mine, Avery R. Young, my creative partner. We've been partners for like 6 years now, and we work in a very collaborative efforts all the time. We love to collaborate. This is called the Remix Project, and it came out of he and I are both products of that culture, DJ culture, and the idea that remix is really important. And also, how do you teach these really abstract notions of photography? They're very difficult to understand. You point the camera at something, but then how do you build space in a photograph? You know, how do you create depth in ambience in a photograph? So we said, how about we just give them master works and let them copy them, right? And this is just one of the pictures that came from that. It's another one. This is Avery R. Young. And we did these on the campus. I brought my car to school one day, and they all piled on top of it. And the most difficult part about that project was the photographers, go back one for me. The photographer saying to me, Mr. McDonald, why can't we be the models? Right? Because in their minds, that was the important job. You know, so I'm the schlub with the camera going, no, it's not. It's the camera, it's the photographer, that's what's important. So, as I said, Nick laid out a lot of information, but what I found most rewarding is, I still find most rewarding, I'm always collaborating with other artists. I'm interested in, what it does give me is another body in the classroom. So if I have a writer with me, a poet, another body in the classroom is a real luxury. So I can bounce ideas off of Avery. The students can find the personality they want to click with, you know, because Avery's like up here, and I'm real cool down here. And so they can find the person that they want to be with, right? And Avery and I, we know them both ways coming and going, right? So also that process mirrors contemporary art practice. Most artists today are thought to or should know how to work in more than one medium, right? And when we go to exhibitions, you see artists all the time. They're working in paint, they're working in photographs, they're working in sound, video. It's expected that you do that. And so we want to mirror the same thing in the classroom. The future as I see it is I have begun to formalize my methods and management of my TA practice. And I've made a conscious effort to integrate all of my hats. So now I just wear really one nice hat, right? So that includes TA practice, my individual practice, my college teaching, my artist residency. It all is just one big umbrella now, and I'm one man walking around as an artist. And I no longer try to separate these different lives. And I found that I function better, I'm seamless now, and my work is just better, right? Their work is my work is their work, wherever I'm at. So I'm a teaching artist at Columbia College classroom, right? I'm not a college professor then, I'm still a teaching artist, right? I recently had a 5-week residency in a K through 12 school in Knoxville, Tennessee. A really wealthy school, all the facilities you could ever want, materials, But I found they really lack sophistication in dealing with a modern or contemporary art practice. And like you said, it was very much like a conservatory approach. And I thought it was weird that the teachers kept referring to me as the real artist. They said they get to work with the real artist. And I'm like, well, what are you then? You're the art teacher. And so then that's when I realized, I said, well, no, they need teaching artists as well. It's not just my kids on the west side, West Lawndale, or in Roseland. It's these kids out here on that 300-acre campus. They need teaching artists as well. So that made me rethink my target audience. Like, who can I reach? How far can my reach be? Presently, I'm working in a K-12 school in Evanston, both as a teaching artist, and a design consultant. They wanted, the PTA of all people wanted to redo a wall, a trophy case, and make it a media center, right? So I think artists have to kind of reimagine what their roles could be. And then finally, I think that the current climate of education reform is a way for an artist to enter the system, dismantle the system, and become key players in rebuilding the system. I feel like I've arrived at the right time, and the possibilities just seem endless for me right now. So, thank you.
Good evening. I'd like to begin my remarks by first thanking the multiple sponsors of this important event for inviting my participation on today's panel. This event is significant for me because Nick Rapkin's work is important because it reminded me of the importance of stating and restating that somehow education reform has been a little bit wrong-headed when it comes to the experiences of urban youth, low-resource youth, and youth of color particularly. And what I mean is the following, that somehow we've forgotten that their humanity includes their cognitive life, their socio-emotional life, and their biological lives. And the integration of the three is very often not part of the focus of education reform, as both Nick Rapkin's comments noted, as well as the report. So my bee in the bonnet is that somehow we have not appreciated the domains of children's human development. And what TAs provide, from my perspective, is they provide a scaffolding between those three domains of human development. Schools too often focus on cognitive outcomes, as opposed to also understanding the role of socio-emotional functioning, given the biology of their selves experienced most often as stress, given the often under-resourced communities and schools that they attend. And for me, this is very problematic because it sort of undermines their option of showing their palette of many colors, of their creativity and their intellectual outcomes. The perspective which I'm emphasizing and came out very clearly, I think, in Nick Rapkin's presentation and also in the report, has certainly been witnessed by those of us who've had the opportunity to visit Cuba. There is no question that the U.S. embargo has made a huge economic impact. However, the economic impact could not affect the embracing of art and culture in Cuba. They represent baseline and critical elements of Cuban education and community life. Thus, there is no question as to why, given its extreme poverty, Cuba continues to be a huge exporter of educators and physicians to nations in need around the globe. It is not surprising then why Cuba, given its poverty for the 2005-2009 period, as reported by UNICEF, reports a 100% adult literacy rate. Further, the primary school net enrollment attendance rate is not the same period. Similarly, for youth between 15 and 24, the literacy rate for males and females is 100%. In fact, when examining an international ranking of 183 countries for literacy, Cuba ranked next to the highest in the number 2 position, with a literacy rate of 99.9. Now, although the U.S. shared the 20th position in ranking with 25 other countries, its position is obviously not in keeping with the resources used for the task of teaching and learning. Having visited schools, interviewed teachers, administrators, and students, what I can say firsthand is that even without resources, there is obvious investment in the totality of human development for their children. The arts and the multiple contexts in support of its expression are everywhere. In fact, one can say that it allows greater impact of the available resources because the arts support the scaffolding of students' learning experiences. That is, the arts provide a safe socio-emotional, if you will, context or experience for taking the intellectual risks that result in achievement. The following is fairly evident. That is, if considered with full respect for students and teachers' basic human functioning, TAs should have a significant role in the future of American education. As stated, it provides the needed scaffolding between youth's biology-linked stress experiences, students' social-emotional functioning, and identities as learners, as linked with their cognitive products or achievement scores. Anything less than simultaneous attention to all 3 domains of human development is destined to keep this nation in the 20th ranked position, which for one source, that is the United Nations Development Program, is currently listed. We list behind 44 other nations. Pressing for the inclusion of TAs into planning for America's future in education needs to happen. It's a no-brainer. Given the role of well-educated student constituencies for the future care of our graying nation of adults, thus we need to make these inclusive changes. It would be wonderful to innovate as suggested this evening because it is the right thing to do. Of course, as well, we can consider these needed changes because without human development informed and sensitive change in our educational systems, adding in TAs, then we should innovate because we are appropriately afraid. Thank you.
This is a really tough act to follow. Thanks for putting me last, Nick. Good evening, everybody. How we doing? Good. I'm Mario Rosero. I'm the Director of Arts Education for Chicago Public Schools in the Department of Arts Education. So it's nice to be here with everyone. Do we feel like what's been said tonight is resonating with us, right? These things, to me, feel like true, inherent truths that I know and live and breathe. I don't even know what that means. I'm so out of touch. Anyways, I guess my talking points are really about offering some district context based in Chicago, but also sort of a bird's eye view. I just spent some time in DC yesterday with the NEA talking about arts assessment. So I have a couple different lenses to look at this work through, but I think if we keep Nick's words in mind, as well as my fellow panelist, hopefully what I say, if you could all have the sort of the goal of looking for opportunities, right? So if we look at Chicago Public Schools right now, there's some major things in the pipeline that are happening, right? So we have the full school day. So there's an additional 90 minutes of time within the school day. So no matter how anybody feels about that, it is more time, right? And so what we're hearing is that there's interest in the arts to address that time. Now, some people might feel that it's filling the time, and some might be really utilizing the time, right? But it exists, so there's opportunity there. We have, this Common Core initiative that's happening right now. So, we see a lot about literacy, and that's sort of the first thing that's being addressed. We see some math work. And in the conversation yesterday in DC, we got a report out on the new arts core standards that are being developed. So that's really exciting work because they're taking the 21st century learning and workforce information, and they're looking at Common Core, and they're looking at the arts. So we're not really behind the curve. We're actually, I guess, kind of ahead because they're looking at so many different pieces of information to design what the arts piece will look like, right? So when I think about the arts place in the school system in terms of Common Core, there's possibly some integration opportunities, but we're looking at the relationship between the arts and this Common Core instruction, right? We're also looking at what's core in the arts, right? So I think Nick's comment about, discipline-based arts versus arts integration, I never knew why that debate was even going on. I say use every tool that you have at your disposal depending on the need of your audience, right? How are kids best gonna learn this stuff, right? So you use whatever tool is at hand. So the other part of this sort of what I'm calling a perfect storm is that we also have a call from the state to assess every content area that's being taught right now. Do we have system-wide arts assessments? Joanne, no. We know, yeah. So, how do you measure each of the 4 state-recognized arts disciplines and look at student growth and also look at teacher effectiveness, right? So I'm charged with developing this arts assessment system that will measure student growth system-wide in the arts from one grade to the next, but it will be a reflection of teacher effectiveness, right? So with all these things in place, it seems like a really big charge for arts education to maintain, to exist, to thrive and grow, right? So how do we, with, I think there's about 800 to 900 arts educators that are certified staff within the district, right? How do we reach our thousands of kids and sort of hit all these charges? So in my mind, it's really the opportunity to collaborate. So there's no way that we can possibly do this on our own, right? Like I look at my department, which has 4 positions. I'm not gonna be able to reach 680 schools with just 4 people. So we're really looking at how, in 2012, do we sort of multiply ourselves to reach everyone? So I think we have enough need at the table to say, it's not just about certified arts staff, but it's really about the teaching artists as well in partnership to say, what are the identified needs of schools? So if we look at the full school day, for example, schools have gone through this planning process to say, okay, community of stakeholders, what are your priorities, right? What are your needs? So we're not just basing our decisions on the deserts or the holes, but also on what we envision and what we want to achieve for the future, right? And so through that analysis, as a principal or as a lead teacher in that school, I may say, well, how do I get media and technology in with my science and math classes, right? And I want to do that through the arts. Well, I don't have a huge bank of certified arts teachers that have that expertise. I'm going to be looking to partner organizations and teaching artists to meet that need. Or how do we bring in dance instruction to the schools during this extra 90 minutes of time? So I think there's a lot of available opportunity, right? And I think Nick's point about the elegant fit is really important, because I don't know about you, but I watched the Grammys the other night, and I'm sad about Whitney, first of all. We can recognize that. But, I know, right? So sad. My God. But when I look at the collaborations that are happening on stage between different artists, I don't know that I saw enough elegant fit, right? So it's funny, but it really matters the way that you connect with other adults. And so, and you just talked about it, Cecil, having another adult in the room to collaborate with has so much value, right? So my teachers are very isolated, right? They're probably the only one or one of few arts-focused teachers in the building, right? And even, I mean, even the disciplines are so very different unto themselves. So I remember when I was an arts teacher and had my first teaching artist come into the room, it was like someone had finally like pulled the shades open. And I was like, oh my God, there's sunlight outside, look at that. Wow, and birds sing. But like, yeah, like landed on, anyways. So I think we have an opportunity, and we have to be really smart and strategic because there are all these spaces. CPS especially is going through so many changes that there's a lot of wiggle room through the cracks, and there's a lot of new opportunities that have been created, right? And so I know that there's desire and there's forward momentum within this room, right, to reach every student that we can in the system. So, you know, my charge really, when I look at the office and I align to district priorities, my bottom line is really, how do we serve all students and not just some, right? So it's about equity and access. So how do we provide this sort of equitable arts education to every student? And equitable does not mean equal, right? It doesn't mean the same. It doesn't mean exactly the same. It means that every kid deserves the same opportunity, right? And it may play out in different ways because we know every kid and every school and every community is completely different and unique, right? I mean, if you live anywhere in the city and you travel to another neighborhood, we all have a unique identity, and how do we address that? And I think the arts are so, they're so uniquely geared towards adapting to situations, right? So when we think about innovation, like, it's because we're adaptable and constantly solving for problems or constantly working within limitations or constraints, right? So this, I think, constraint of, you know, where we are with public education right now, I think the arts can figure out the wiggle room around that, and definitely looking at, I guess my final thoughts are, you know, we're looking at if you're a kindergarten student and we're looking to your future career throughout a school system and what's the end result, where will you end up? What does that pathway look like? And there's so much work with the creative industries and problem solving and innovation that I think that's going to be a real key to getting us there, and we need basically everyone in this room working together to support our kids to get there. I think that's it.
Great. Before we open up the floor to your questions and provocations of the evening, we want to provide the opportunity for the respondents and Nick to engage in a little bit of a dialogue and kind of address each other.
I had my say.
Well, I just made some points that I thought were of interest. This idea of voice, you know, like so many schools are going through the turnaround, right? And I happen to be in a school that's doing that. And I just thought it was fascinating that nobody in the school was talking about it with the kids. And so Avery and I, we were like, well, how about we just turn video cameras on and have groups of students interview their teachers about the turnaround, right? And it's called The Turnover is what it's called. That's the name of the project. So, you know, it was this idea of, that was, for me, really ripe for everything. There's historical things there. There's this idea of business, because students were like, well, isn't this CPS? Well, no, it's not CPS. It's another school. And so there's all this wrong information going back and forth. And then what really touched me was when I came back from there was an interview, the next day we came back to show the kids, and he ran up to me, he's like, Mr. McDonald, you know, I want to do another interview. I really like that. I want to do more of those. And I realized he hadn't had a chance to question adults, like to really question them, right? And then they're crying, the teachers are crying, and he sees the girl next to him is crying, and he sees how powerful this thing is. And then he watches it on the videotape, right? And then they're making photographs and they're writing about it. And so I don't know where I'm going with this, but I like that the idea of the voice, that's true voice, right? Owning that, and you're part of this thing, this huge thing, but then you don't like let the kids like deal with it, right? And then it's 5th grade and 8th grade, right? And then you make art from it. That's like a great art project, you know? What happens when you're turned around, you know? How do you move past that? Can you move past that? Well, of course you can, right? So, but I thought that also you made really wonderful, like I said, I felt like you were talking to me. Like I said, I know you interviewed like 300 people, but I was like, no.
I think we did interview.
Yeah, you did, right? I said, but no, I said that. I know I said that to him, right? And I knew he had to talk to you, so I'm not sure what else to say to you, my friend, but anyone else want to jump in, have something they want to add?
I really appreciated Cecil's comments as well, of course, as Nick's, because this notion of giving youth voice, allowing them to have voice, for me really represents acknowledging their humanity in terms of, yes, they're, thinkers in terms of their cognitive domain, but they also feel relative to their socio-emotional domain. And they are biological human entities, which means then that all the stress involved in our efforts to silence them, the only outcome we want from them are achievement outcomes. And they're processing these oppressive, if you will, messages, at school, in communities, because, police officers don't always view them as children with potential, but they're viewed as frightening short adults. So there's a lot going on, with youth, and there are not many opportunities to express it. And I think that art allows a real, substantive integration of their domains of their human functioning. And for me, as an applied developmental psychologist who's very much committed to ensuring that our young people are allowed to show all their competencies and to do as well as they can, because they also are inferring respect and support. And that for me, their meaning-making process is expressed through art, which then serves as a scaffolding. So they can take on the intellectual task of learning, as long as there are always, and also opportunities to express their meaning-making, their voice, that too often in this country as young people is not valued and not welcome. So I appreciate the comments, because I think they speak to the urgency that youth have to share their meaning-making in ways other than achievement test outcomes.
One of the things that I was super curious about the research project was the international or the national scope of it, and if I would feel, Cecil, like you did of oh yeah, I said that, if it was spread out over the nation, or I've only taught in Chicago, so, but then Margaret, you introduced Cuba and this international idea, and I wonder, Nick, if there is any sort of impetus of this research to go into an international conversation, or if that's part of your thought process now.
There are so many directions, exciting directions that the research could go. Sadly, there's not a lot of support to do the work or the research. And in this economy, I've found it impossible, really, to support further research into this. So actually, in a way, that's a blessing, because what it does is it says, the message for me for that was, take the time to really punch this message across. What I'm finding through the blogs on Huffington Post and talks like this is there is an audience that's really ready and receptive and eager to hear it and excited about it. And with that in mind, I want to say, it was important that Cush and Robbie split to go to the meeting about the Chicago Cultural Plan. When I was introduced, you heard that I'm part of the team that's helping to develop the new Chicago Cultural Plan. As it happens, I'm old enough to be part of the team that developed the last one in 1986, too. So that's why I don't have any teeth. The thing is that this is an opportunity for you guys to speak your voice. There is, for very good reason, lots of cynicism about whether it's worth it. I bet those of you who heard that there were going to be meetings on the cultural plan have asked yourself, do I want to Saturday morning to go to one of these meetings, and I want to urge you to do it. It's important. The more times people say at those meetings that a top priority for this city has got to be that every kid who goes to Chicago public schools should get a good education, and that includes the arts, the more likely it is that it'll be in the plan and that we'll be able to use the plan to hold the district's feet to the fire. We've got an ally in Mario in the Arts Education Office. It's what a difference it will make to have somebody in the Arts Education Office who's effective inside the district and who understands what goes on in the arts.
Can I do my thing?
Yeah, do your thing.
And then I'll give it right back, I promise. And I wasn't gonna do this, but it's like, I think it's gonna be like my calling card now. So I was at the first sort of pilot of the cultural plan process, right? And so one of the ideas that came up from the group, this is my idea, but from the group, was that for every neighborhood, and you can make it as tiny as you want, right? Maybe it's even small, maybe it's just your block where you live, that we need a cultural or an arts champion for every single neighborhood across the city, right? So the thing that I did was I knighted everybody. So you're all knighted, the sword coming down. You are knighted as our arts champions for whoever you represent and wherever you are to carry this charge, because that's what it is. It's how does the city own arts education for all of our kids? It's not just this panel, and it's not just the people in these seats. It's all of us spreading the word, right? So you're knighted, just so you know. That's all.
So I know I've got a lot of thoughts spinning in my head. I'm sure you do as well. We'd be happy to open up the floor for conversation. What provocations do you have? What did you hear today that resonates with you? I know we're probably going to be able to hear each other, but I'll just remind you to try to project. And for sound reasons, I'll probably be repeating your question, even if we can hear you. So keep that in mind. Miss Jordan LaSalle.
See you tomorrow night.
Okay. But who else do you have the ear of? Do you have some corporate audiences who would be willing to champion the idea of innovation coming into the workforce and building that economic sector? And if so, how can we help you in that way as well?
Well, you know, there's lots of stuff going on. It's not just the plan. There's also Ingenuity, Inc., which was a co-sponsor of this evening's program as well. And Ingenuity is the agent that's trying to knit all those pieces together. So if you guys don't know Ingenuity yet, get to know it. They're trying to do that. The plan, you know, the plan is, plans are tricky business, right? Most plans get written and then they get put on a shelf and they gather dust. The plan in '86, I want to say this, in some respects you could look at the plan in '86 and say it really didn't make anything happen. And then again, when you look at what was recommended in that plan and you sort of go down the list, you say, wait a minute, almost all those things did happen. They happen in mysterious ways. One of the reasons they happen, though, is because in '86, so many people came out and said, we want them to happen. It was the first time in the history of Chicago that an alderman showed up at a meeting where there were 150 people from his neighborhood who said, we care about the future of the arts in our city. The arts were a non-entity. This is an opportunity for us to sort of renew that spirit, I think. I think the impact of the plan will be less in the particulars of, how we will get the job done of making sure that every school has got arts education, but very important in terms of building the political will that has to be there to get it done.
Thank you. Lynn has a question.
I guess I'm asking Nick and Mario both. Nick, you talked about that traditional conflict between teaching artists and certified arts specialists in the schools, and the need to break that down. And Mario, you gave a great example of a merger that could naturally occur and then impact far more students. And I guess I wondered what both of you thought about how to build that culture, because that conflict does exist and it is divisive. So how does that divisive culture get broken down and become united?
Question is relating to building a culture kind of calm, I guess, a culture of calm between teaching artist, specialist, and teaching artist.
So it's funny, I was actually in a conversation today around the full school day, which is pretty much most conversations every day. But, it was said to me that, okay, so if we have more opportunity for organizations and teaching artists to come into the classroom, we really have to, communicate that the classroom teacher in the room needs to be actively engaged, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, well, wait, I know that, but are you saying that's best practice, or are you saying that that is now our bottom line? And so it was a shifting of the tides, because that was going to be it's like the new message that's coming out is that it's not, like from the district, it's not okay to be sitting in the back of the room grading papers while this other excellent person is doing all the work, right? So I think that there is some tide shifting that's happening, right? So I think this is all about messaging, right? And who's saying what and who's saying it how often. So the fact that the district's taking a stance, I think, is really important. But when we talk about successful partnerships, it's just like arts integration, right? So if you're going to integrate the arts with another subject area, one is not beholden to the other, right? It's equal attention to each subject, right? They are equal. So I think that you have to look at the partnership that way. That if it's two adults in the room, that there's an equalness to what they are contributing. So I guess my answer is really about messaging.
I have a slightly different take on it, maybe less philosophical, really. It's, number one, we got to look at schools where teaching artists and art specialists are working successfully side by side. They are the models for how to do it. They're out there. There are lots of them. We heard some stories already tonight about places where that's happening. Second, teaching artists and full-time specialists in the schools do different stuff. What Mario just described about teaching artists working in a classroom with a regular classroom teacher is not something that art specialists have time to do if they're going to teach the standards, right? So if we're going to do that, if we're going to do them both, and it's important to do them both, then we need teaching artists too. So the simple answer to your question is, let's just begin to systematize and describe the different jobs that they do. They're different.
It's interesting. Another question, and as an arts partner, I think too, like how do we kind of gather the research that we have on the schools that we work with to make sure that we're addressing those areas that aren't being covered in a school already? Back in there on the right, sir.
Given the economic conditions of PAs, have you thought of engaging the professional performance unions like Actors Equity, AFM, AGMA, which do have medical insurance, which do have pension welfare? And my own experience with Actors Equity is that they are willing to discuss that. That way, TAs, a lot of whom are members of those unions, can get the kind of benefits that they desperately need. It seems to me that the TA community, or the arts education community, is somewhat afraid of the unions, involving the unions in what we do. But they are the professional representatives of us in the art form. Has anybody reached out to them?
The only example that I'm aware of is that TAs at Lincoln Center in New York, Lincoln Center Institute in New York, are members. Does anybody know what union they're members of?
802. It's the musicians union.
Musicians, okay. Yeah, but I'm not aware of any other union that has a relationship with teaching artists. Not yet.
The existing contracts do not fit what we do.
Yeah.
But they're willing to negotiate a different one.
They work for Columbia and are part-time employees for us, or where are they? The Columbia union.
Awesome.
Get Columbia to hire.
Next question, all the way in the back.
Older adults is an important population, as are youth. And there's a great way to combine them all with intergenerational, but it's also really good to think about for the future how we can all be trained to serve our population better. I'm a big fan of lifelong learning. I think that's one of the things that artists do in general. We continue learning, we never stop. That's another reason why we're perfect, ideal people to be working with all sorts of population, not just youth.
Yeah, I would agree. On any given day, I am working with a fifth grader and like a 65-year-old woman who's just wants to learn photography, and I'm trying to teach her Photoshop. And like, here's the mouse right here. So, yeah, I agree. Right. And I think that part of that is just breaking down the categories of to whom you teach, right? So I'm just a teaching artist. It doesn't matter who's in front of me, right? So I would definitely love to do a project with seniors, and they will be part of my project. They would do their own project, and then I will make a project out of them, right? And then go, like I said, down the street to the fifth grade and do the same thing. It's all about getting rid of the categories and just being a creative, you know, and just working with whomever and whoever is in front of you.
I like the idea of making projects out of people. That sounds fun. Next question. Sir, right here.
All right, can you tell us more about, you said there was a meeting at St. High School tomorrow. Can you tell us more about it?
Yeah, there is a meeting at Senn High School tomorrow evening about this same time. One of those, there are 4 town hall planning meetings. The first one is tonight up the street at Columbia. The second one's tomorrow night at Senn. Third one is Saturday morning at DuSable Museum. And the fourth one is Tuesday evening at the National Museum of Mexican Art. But the important thing is jot down Chicago Cultural Plan 2012.com. All the information is on the website. There are going to be about 30 more meetings in neighborhoods across the city as well. So you don't have to go to the town hall. You could go to one of the neighborhood meetings. All will be opportunities for you to speak up. Speak up multiple times, actually. Multiply yourselves. Tell your friends to go, okay?
Thank you. David, question on here.
So Nick, you spoke about how in your research, teaching artists primarily say they learn on the job, and there's not a whole lot of formal training, and perhaps some of the formal training they've had is not as powerful as learning on the job. And in spite of the amazing work that's come out of Chicago and the teaching artists who've done great work over the decades, there has not been a citywide training kind of program, and this is our first attempt actually curious if there are trends in your looking at these cities of similar initiatives that are starting to emerge, and if there's a cry for that or a desire and a need that was coming out of the voice that you heard.
Yeah, absolutely. There's interest in teaching artist training across the country. All the big cities that we studied had something going on. To a large extent, a lot of what has been going on, the larger initiatives in those big cities, to a large extent, are really largely designed to try to figure out how to fit this round peg into the square hole in the schools. And that's a complicated and difficult and challenging question. And so a lot of the energy in other programs has been devoted to helping TAs understand school culture and how to build good relationships and strong partnerships in schools. What I think is distinctive about TAD, and I know about TAD fairly intimately, is that TAD really is focusing on the making and teaching of the art in a way that I didn't see elsewhere in the country. And I think, you know, I have to say that I take a lot of pride in Chicago's leadership since the 90s, when CAPE really was the first organization to kind of make its mark in doing focused, thoughtful, deep arts integration, to TAD Studio, now here at Columbia, in kind of leading, being the leader in the development of innovative ideas about arts education. I think we can take a lot of pride in it, and frankly, I think it goes back, the roots go back to Jane Addams and Viola Spolin. I think this is part of that tradition. We should see ourselves as part of that tradition and be damn proud of it.
So there are lots of informal channels, obviously, because relationships are important in our work, right? So recommendations by word of mouth happen often, long-standing relationships, right? So that exists. So I'm also looking at more formal approaches to that to say, I mean, full school days, whatever that is, but it's also pushing us to think as a system, how do we create really obvious inroads and mechanisms so it's really easy for partners to find schools and schools to find partners. The arts, fortunately, because of Ingenuity and because of the Arts Alliance, are a little bit ahead of the game because we have the Artist Exchange through the Arts Alliance where schools and partners can create profiles, right? So this is who I am, this is what I offer, this is my school, et cetera, et cetera. And then that feeds into the Art Look Map. Are you familiar with it? Yeah, so the Art Look Map shows us what we've been calling the deserts and the forests, right? So you should be able to look at that and do a search and say, oh, this part of the city is actually in need of arts programming or in need of this kind of arts programming. That's a place that needs attention, right? Or like for schools, I'm thinking it's a great tool to say, you know, maybe I'm a new principal, I'm really interested in expanding the arts at my school. Jordan has a school across the street. How can we maybe pool or share resources to invest in a partner to meet both of our mutual needs? So I'd say those tools are a really good starting point. And then my office and department, even though we're small, we're really happy to pay matchmaker, because lots of times schools will call us and say, this is our need, who's the best fit, right? And so I guess I just want to tag on to the end of my response. Sort of a next thing that maybe will prompt some thinking is this sort of need for data and what assessments are taking place, right? So to have the elegant fit of partner in school, you'd want to be meeting some sort of needs identified by what data, right? So I'm just curious if people are interested in that conversation, sort of what assessments are happening in the teaching artist world and how that's informing the work, and then what data is maybe coming out of that, because even though that sounds like, oh my God, Mario's such an administrator, data is really the name of the game, right? But it's also, assessment is fun and interesting, and I know it's really, my inner nerd is coming out, but you know, how do you measure your effectiveness with students and really put that in their hands to say, this is what's coming out? So I hope I answered your question, and I hope I posed a new good one.
We have time for just one more question today, unfortunately, so who has a really burning question? Corinne.
I've worked as a teaching artist and I run a teaching artist program, so I'm also a Chicago certified. And I fully support teaching artist programs, believe me, I do. But I'm also, concerned about this. We have a 90-minute addition to the school day and no additional funding to program that time. And if we're looking partly to teaching artists to fill that time, then that burden is shifting to the nonprofit sector to make this working part. And also, again, perpetuating, I very much support teaching artists' work, but supporting teaching artists' work rather than perhaps investing in these jobs that we may, provide and health insurance and that type of thing. So I'm just wondering about sort of this economic things happening, shifting, who's paying for this.
So I can take the beginning part of that. Maybe somebody else will have a comment. So at least, the full school day snippet is that the budgets have not been released yet for schools for next year. So we don't know what that will look like, right? We are hopeful that there will be funds to support that work. So I can't really say much more than that, but they haven't been released to schools yet. So we're hopeful that there will be the funds needed to carry that stuff out. And I guess,
the 90 minutes.
yeah, well, or the additional partnerships, right? And then I think the other thing is that we're all in this sort of day and age where we have to be really strategic, right? And therefore, I think even more need for collaboration, whether that's sharing of information or sharing of resources. Any other responses there?
I think we just have, history doesn't stand still. And if we get a longer school day and it opens up the kinds of opportunities that Mario's talking about, those opportunities are going to lead to something else too. So I don't think that, I think it's important to look at not as the longer school day as the final destination. It's something along the way to something else. Yes. 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 And look, I think we can all be realists and say the state has got its own problems with money these days. In part, it's why I invoked the name Reagan and said, remember it. That's, we can lay that on Ronald Reagan. This is a political culture that took 30 years to get to this point. And damn it, it's unfortunate. It may take 30 years for us to get back to where we should be. But this should be the place where we start to turn.
We leave tonight saying, Reagan. But
Satan.
This kind of has a rhyme. I think, there's obviously a lot of work being done here together as a community. We're putting the pieces together, I think, that really matter. We do have an Office of Arts Education. We have, and hopefully will continue to have, a teacher professional development plan in place for teaching artists, and hopefully that will continue here at Columbia. We've got new organizations, like you've heard, Ingenuity Incorporated, that's doing mapping and researching and connecting all of us to these questions that we're asking today. We have research that Nick is presenting that only kind of, leaves us not only, I think, with a really important charge, but, really the, fire to get out there and make sure that we are the people that are really continuing to advocate and be that kind of knight on our block for this work. We have the Arts and Education Exchange through the Art Alliance Illinois. If you don't know about that, that's a provider network of profiles for arts providers and educators so that you can come and kind of see what's going on in a school, what programs are being offered, and that's statewide. And finally, we have, not finally, we also have the Teaching Artist Journal for the practice here. I don't know if Nick is in the room, but the Teaching Artist Journal is a professional publication that really rigorously looks at the work and shares that on a national and probably international scale. And of course, we have each other, which is the kind of cheesy, nice way to end things, but it's really true. The work we do, I think, really comes back to relationships and believing in what we do and the power of what we do together. So let's get to it. I mean, we've got a lot of balls in the air already. Let's keep them up there. And finally, before we invite you into the reception just next door, we wanted to make sure that we recognize the sponsors of this evening and the people that made this possible. The funding of this colloquium was made possible by the support of the Lloyd A. Fry Foundation, J.P. Morgan Chase Foundation, the Cultural Policy Center, Harris School of Public Policy Studies, and NORC at the University of Chicago. And of course, a special thanks to Ingenuity Incorporated, the Center for Community Arts Partnerships at Columbia College Chicago, and the Teaching Artist Development Studio, the TAD Studio, and of course the Cultural Policy Center, Harris School of Public Policy Studies, and the University of Chicago. So let's keep it going, let's keep those questions up, and please invite yourself and meet some other people and keep the conversation going next door. Thank you everybody for coming out, and thank you to the panelists.